Feeling invisible isn't about being alone in a room. It's about being in the conversation, in the group chat, in the relationship even, and still feeling like nobody actually registers you're there. That's what this is about. Why you can be present and still feel like background noise to everyone around you. I noticed it clearest with the friend group I was part of for almost 2 years. I was the one who remembered birthdays. I was the one who checked in when someone went quiet for a few days. I planned things. I showed up early. I asked people how their week actually went, not just as a greeting, but because I wanted to know the real answer. I'd remember small stuff too, like someone mentioning a job interview weeks earlier, and I'd actually follow up on it. For a while I thought that's just who I was, the reliable one, the one who pays attention to details other people forget. I didn't think of it as invisible. I thought of it as being dependable. I thought dependable meant valued. I thought if I kept showing up the way I did, someone would eventually show up for me the same way, without me having to ask, without me having to remind them I exist. But it never really happened, not in the way I expected. People would take days to respond to me but reply to others in minutes, sometimes in the same conversation thread. So I could literally see the difference in real time. Plans I suggested would get half-hearted answers. A maybe, a we'll see, but the same plan suggested by someone else got instant yeses and excited replies. I started noticing it at gatherings too. I'd say something and get a quiet nod. And then someone else would say almost the same thing 5 minutes later, and the whole room would react. Nobody was rude about it, nobody said anything mean. That's what made it confusing. Because if someone's cruel to you, at least you have something to point at, something to be upset about that makes sense. This was quieter than that. It was just absence. It was just being an afterthought without anyone ever admitting it out loud. Without anyone doing anything you could actually call them out on. After a while, it started living in my head at night, which is usually when this stuff surfaces. I'd replay conversations and wonder what I said wrong, or if I talked too much or too little, or if I came off as too available and that somehow made me less interesting. I'd think back to specific moments like a text I sent that got left on read for 2 days while I watched that same person post stuff online in between. I started overanalyzing texts, counting how long people took to respond to me versus how fast they responded to others, actually doing the math in my head like it was evidence for a case I was building. I'd tell myself I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive, that everyone's just busy, that not everything is personal, but then the same pattern would happen again a week later. The same slow reply, the same lukewarm interest, and I'd feel that same sting, quieter but familiar. Like I'd been here before and would be here again. What got to me most was the doubt it created about myself. I started wondering if I was actually boring, if there was something flat about my personality that made people forget I existed, unless I reminded them I was still around. I started performing a little, trying to be funnier, trying to have more to say, trying to take up more space in conversations just so people would remember I was in the room. And not just someone who was technically invited, and that's exhausting. Having to audition for attention you used to think was just given freely, just because you showed up and were decent to people. I kept telling myself it is what it is, that some people are just like that I shouldn't take it personally, that this is just how groups work sometimes. But underneath that, I still hoped someone would notice on their own. I still hoped I wouldn't have to keep proving I was worth checking in on, worth remembering without effort. The pattern I started noticing wasn't just about one friend group or one person. It was everywhere I looked once I started paying attention. It was in how people replied to my texts last, after replying to 3 other people first. Like I was somewhere at the bottom of a list I didn't know existed. It was in how I'd bring something up and it would get a nod. But when someone else brought up the same thing minutes later, suddenly everyone was interested. Suddenly it was worth talking about. It was in how I was always the one initiating, always the one asking if we were still on for something, always the one keeping things alive when the silence would have just swallowed it otherwise. And I started to realize this wasn't really about me being boring or unlikable. It was about effort being one-sided without anyone ever calling it that. Nobody says I don't prioritize you. They just don't. And you're left to figure out what that means on your own. At 2 in the morning, staring at your phone. Honestly, the scariest part wasn't the loneliness itself. It was the fear that this was just how it would always be. That I'd keep being the one who remembers, who checks in, who shows up. And other people would keep treating that as normal instead of something worth matching. I started fearing that maybe I was built for this role permanently. The background character in everyone else's main story. The guy who's there, but never the reason anyone shows up. I'd see people talk about their best friends, their person, someone who always shows up for them no matter what. And I'd wonder if I even had that, or if I was just that person for everyone else while nobody was that for me. That fear sits different than sadness. It's quieter, but it doesn't go away as easy, and it doesn't really have a moment where it's supposed to end. What made it worse is I couldn't even be mad at anyone specific. Nobody did anything obviously wrong. Nobody excluded me on purpose that I could see or prove. It was just this slow drift where I kept giving the same energy and getting less back, and it never felt like a big enough moment to bring up. How do you tell someone, hey, you took 4 days to text me back, but 10 minutes for them, without sounding like you're keeping score, without sounding a little unhinged, honestly? So I didn't say anything, I just noticed, and kept noticing, and let it build quietly while still showing up the same way I always had, hoping it would shift on its own eventually, hoping someone would catch on without me having to spell it out. It wasn't just the friend group either. I noticed the same thing dating someone for a couple months last year. She'd take hours to reply during the day, sometimes almost a full day, but I'd see she was active online the whole time. Then at night, out of nowhere, she'd text like nothing happened, like the silence never existed. I used to make excuses for it in my head. She's busy, she's got a lot going on. Not everyone texts back fast. Some people just aren't glued to their phone. But I started noticing she replied to other people quick. I saw it in a group chat we were both in, her responding in minutes to someone else's dumb joke while my message from that morning just sat there unread for hours. And I didn't say anything about it, because what would I even say? Hey, I noticed you reply faster to other people than me. It sounds crazy out loud, even though it wasn't crazy. It was just true. And true things can still sound insane when you say them to someone's face. I started keeping little mental notes without meaning to. Like the time I asked if she wanted to grab food and she said, maybe, let me see. And then 20 minutes later posted something about being out with friends already. Or the time I mentioned I had a rough day at work and got a thumbs up emoji back. Just a thumbs up, nothing else, while a few days earlier she'd written paragraphs to someone else about a bad day they had. None of it was huge on its own. That's the thing. Nobody tells you about this kind of stuff. It's never one big moment you can point to and say, there. That's when I knew. It's 50 small moments stacked on top of each other until you can't ignore the shape they make anymore. That's kind of how dating feels now, honestly. Not just with her, with basically everyone I've talked to since. And honestly with people before her too, if I'm being fair. Nobody really commits to giving you full attention because there's always something else going on for them. Someone else texting them. Some other option sitting in their notifications waiting to be picked up. So you get this in-between thing where you're not ignored exactly, but you're not prioritized either. You're just there, available. Easy to come back to whenever it's convenient. Easy to pick back up whenever nothing better is happening, and that does something to you over time. You start adjusting your expectations without even realizing you're doing it. You stop expecting quick replies. You stop expecting people to double text when you don't respond right away. You just accept slow as normal, because fast starts to feel like too much to ask for. Like you're being needy just for wanting a normal reply time. I remember catching myself one night literally counting minutes on a clock, watching a message sit there delivered but not read, telling myself I wasn't going to check again, then checking again 10 minutes later anyway. That's such a specific kind of tired sitting there, refreshing a conversation like it's going to change if you just look hard enough, and the worst part is, you know while you're doing it that it's not going to help. That staring at the screen isn't going to make the reply come faster, but you do it anyway, because it feels like doing something instead of just sitting with the feeling of being unimportant. What it actually does to your head is quieter than people think it is. It's not some dramatic collapse where you fall apart all at once. It's more like a slow erosion, a little bit at a time, until you don't even notice how much is worn away. You start measuring your worth by response times and reactions, instead of just knowing it plainly. You start thinking if someone replies fast, that means something good, and if they don't, that means something bad. Even when it might not mean anything at all, even when they're just busy or tired or scrolling without thinking. And that's the dangerous part, because you're outsourcing how you feel about yourself to people who aren't even thinking about you that hard in the first place. You become dependent on being noticed just to feel like you exist. And when that noticing doesn't come, you assume it's because you're not enough, instead of realizing some people just don't give attention the way you do. To anyone, ever, no matter who's on the other end. At first, it felt like I wasn't interesting enough, like there was some missing piece in my personality that made people forget I was there, unless I reminded them I existed. I actually used to think that, sat with that thought a lot at night, wondering what it was about me specifically, but it wasn't that. It was that I kept mistaking convenience for connection. I kept thinking if someone was around, if they replied eventually, if they showed up sometimes when it worked for them, that meant they valued me, when really it just meant I was easy to keep around without much effort on their end. Real attention isn't something you have to track like that. It doesn't leave you doing math on response times at midnight. It doesn't leave you comparing how fast someone replies to you versus someone else in the same thread. It's just there, plain and obvious, without you having to build a case for it, like you're presenting evidence in a courtroom. And once I actually saw that difference clearly, I stopped asking why people forget me and started asking why I kept accepting being an option instead of a priority, why I kept settling for whatever attention was left over. I still catch myself sometimes checking read receipts, still catch myself noticing who replies fast and who doesn't, and I don't think that fully goes away overnight. Not for me at least. But I don't take it as personal proof anymore. Not the way I used to. I just notice it now, log it, and let it tell me what it actually is, instead of turning it into some verdict about who I am as a person. I still want the same thing I always wanted, honestly. Someone who checks in without me asking first. Someone who remembers stuff without needing a reminder. Someone who makes it easy instead of making me work for it. I just don't think I'll find that by shrinking myself down to fit into whatever attention people are willing to spare me. So I'm still here, still showing up the way I always have, just watching a little closer now for who actually shows up back.